Buen día para
Good morning, everyone. We would like to thank our speakers, our panelists, for being with us here today.
nuestro siguiente.
Our next panel is called Advancing the Energy Transition with Biomethane, and for such panel, we are going to have a general overview about knowing the opportunities, challenges, and progress in the region. For this, we are going to have Anabella Ruiz as a moderator. She is OLADE project coordinator. We would like to invite her to the stage.
Asimismo,
We would like to ask Pablo Bermúdez to join us as well. He is a technical advisor on the Energy Vice Ministry. And we would like to ask Tomás de Oliviera Bredariol to join as well. He's from the IEA. Okay, so we are going to share a topic which is of novelty for us, particularly for the people that have been working in this journey or in this summit. You have some presentations, and we're going to start with Tomás. He's going to give us a global overview on biomethane. So, Tomás, we would let you start with this general overview.
Gracias.
Thank you. I'm going to switch to English because I think it would be easier for me.
On the devices. Yeah, please go. Thank you. So we have been looking at the outlook and the potential for the production of biogases for a number of years now. We had a first report in 2020 looking at this theme, and this year we revisited it and we took a detailed look at what is the potential based on the feedstock that is available, the infrastructure in place, the different types of activities and the costs to give an idea of where we are now in terms of biogases production and where we might be headed, what is the potential for growth. Could you pass me this? And just, I mean, if you're not very familiar with this, just the basics of this, we are considering different types of feedstock. So this can be animal manure, wastewater sludge, bio-waste or crop residues. These are all potentially sustainable materials. They're not competing with other sources of crops. And typically, you will put these residues in an anaerobic digester to then produce biomethane, and together with biogas, this biogas can be then upgraded to biomethane, which is essentially something that you can directly replace natural gas by. And as co-products or byproducts, you will have digestate, which is something you might use as a fertilizer in the right conditions, and a relatively pure stream of CO2, which can be captured and stored or used, for example, in the food industry. Now, if we look at the growth of biogases in the past years, for a very long time, biogases were produced for use in the agricultural sector mostly to produce electricity and heat. But since about 2015, this growth in biogases kind of stalled. And this is because there is a lot of other competitive alternatives, such as solar, that came at a very cost competitive angle and essentially limited the growth from biogas. But the growth of biomethane kept growing strong, and it actually in the past 2 to 3 years grew by about 20% on average. So there's a lot of interest right now on biomethane. This comes alongside increased concerns with energy security and also the potential uses as something, a way to balance renewables, a way to provide long-term energy flexibility. Naturally, there are challenges in the production and the use of biomethane, but there's a lot of potential here as well. So far, the leading regions in the production of biogases are Europe, the United States and China mostly. There's some amount of biogases production in other regions of the world, but these three are really leading the ranks. We have seen some growth recently in India. And the characteristics of the facilities in these different regions vary quite a bit. For example, in China, there was a lot of investment in about 10 to 20 years ago in small-scale facilities at the farm level, whereas in Europe and in the United States, there's a bit more of an interest in large-scale facilities. Though China is now shifting a bit more to this, as it often provides cost advantages. And so turning into this kind of new analysis that we did this year, what we looked at is, what can we actually produce that is sustainable? And so this means it comes from some form of residue, so it's not competing with food, for example. It's not in an area that is protected or where there's high biodiversity. It is near to some infrastructure that can be used, like roads, and essentially this is something that we could explore today in a sustainable way. And what we see is that there's a lot of potential around the world. When we sum all of it, we get to about 1 trillion cubic meters of natural gas equivalent. So that's about 1/4 of natural gas production today. And this is many times higher current production of biogases, which falls a bit short from 50 billion cubic meters equivalent. So there's a lot of room for growth, and especially there's a lot of room for growth in emerging market and developing economies. So now let's just zoom in a little bit in Europe, which is the lead in this topic so far. Europe produces around 20 BCME of biogases per year. A lot of the growth in the past years has been in biomethane. This has to do with, for example, they're concerned with imports of natural gas from Russia, for example, but they are trying to replace this with domestic resources. And this is one of the key benefits of biogases. And right now, they are producing these 20 BCME. They have a potential of about 50. So they're using more or less 40% of their capacity of sustainable output of these fuels today. Now let's shift gears and look at our region here. And what we see, and this is quite interesting, is there's a lot of untapped potential. Brazil is actually the country that has the largest potential around the world to produce biogases. The region produces close to 2 BCME of biogases today, and there's a potential for almost 200. So we've only tapped about 1% of the potential in the region. There's a lot of growth that is possible. Now, one of the key barriers is the cost. And this is true around the world. It's not only the case here in Central and South America, but usually producing biogases and biomethane is more costly than producing natural gas. So if you don't take into account some of the co-benefits that come alongside biogas production, then often you will not see a lot of growth in this area. And that's part of the reason why Europe has been successful, is because they have got incentives in place, which take into account that this is creating jobs, this is bringing benefits to sustainability, this is helping to reduce emissions. Now, I want to zoom out a little bit and think about the region in the context of bioenergy more generally. Latin America is already very much a leader in bioenergy production. It accounted for about 1/4 of liquid biofuels production. There's a lot of solid bioenergy in the region as well. 85% of the solid bioenergy that you see here is modern solid bioenergy. So there's a small part which is related to the traditional uses of biomass, the 17 million people that I talked about yesterday that still rely on polluting waste for cooking and heating, and this absolutely needs to change. But the region is a leader in liquid and solid modern bioenergy. And you can see this very slim part there, which is gas. And this is the area where we see the largest potential for growth in the coming years. There's a lot of potential, as I mentioned, in Brazil, but other countries like Colombia and Argentina have a lot of potential as well. And here we outline what are the different feedstocks that are available in each of these key regions. You see there's a lot of potential for crop residues. Right now, most of biogas production in the region relies on waste and landfills. There's a lot of potential to use crop residues. And you can also see production on the right side of the chart, and you see that this is a tiny part of the potential that is available. But what is also interesting to see here is that in our stated policy scenario, we see quite a strong growth for biogases in the region. So these are the dots that you see there. If we go to a more climate-aligned scenario, like what we have in the announced pledges scenario, then this growth would be much higher. Because the more you value sustainability aspects, the more important this agenda becomes. Now looking a bit at the different costs of producing biogases around the world, what we see is that on average, the cost is of roughly $20 per gigajoule. So that's relatively above. It's not in every market, but it's often the case that it's higher than natural gas. There's about 50 billion cubic meters of natural gas equivalent that could be produced cost competitively, especially in Asia. But in Latin America, it's often the case that it's a bit more costly, and that's what we see here on this chart. So what is the way to cover this gap? What can we do to incentivize biogases production, and why is this something that we might want to do? And the simplest, there's different ways to think about this, but the simplest one is just the added benefits that it brings. And also that there's a very big difference between wholesale prices and retail prices. And if we just take into account the prices that are paid by the end users, then a lot of this biomethane or biogas becomes cost competitive. And so these are things like you might provide an exemption to transmission costs, for example. And that makes a lot of sense when you think that these resources are being produced locally, that they are creating jobs, that they are using a relatively small share of the infrastructure. But certainly another way to look at this is by valuing emissions. Right now, since there is actually quite a high level of emissions, especially due to methane leaks in biomethane and biogas supply chains, then we would need a price of nearly $260 US to make this cost competitive on the carbon or carbon equivalent. But if we deploy best practices, this would fall to about 130. So just to go through this in a little bit more detail, right now, if we look at all the different plants around the world, we have a leakage rate in energy terms of about 6%. So 6% of the energy that you're producing is being lost through methane leaks around the world. And this naturally varies from place to place. Usually you will see higher leakage rates in smaller facilities than in large-scale facilities. And also depending on what are the practices in place. The best places right now in terms of performance are, for example, Denmark, Germany. They have specific policies to measure these emissions that have requirements, for example, for leak detection and repair. If you simply change the way that you store your digestate, you can have major gains in terms of the efficiency and your loss rates. So if there's a large opportunity here to move from standard practices that leak a lot of methane to best practices. And just to provide you a comparison point, yesterday we were talking about the leakage rates in the oil and gas industry. And globally these are between 1% and 2%. So even if in terms of CO2 emissions, biogases are much, much better than oil and gas, if we have a leakage rate that is 3, 4, 5 times higher than the oil and gas, then there's a much smaller benefit. And that's something that we need to be aware of, and it will make a big difference for the market of biogases to manage these emissions. Now, finally, I want to think about, what are these different benefits? And here we brought some of the results that we have for the European Union, but these are very much in the same sort of scale that we have for our other regions. And as I was mentioning, there are a lot of benefits. These include reducing the need to import fossil fuels. This means that there are investments that are going to the domestic market, because a lot of the spending needed in biomethane and biogases production is on operational costs. And there's also a lot of potential to displace fossil fuels and to avoid emissions. So this is an opportunity in many senses. It's an opportunity for sustainability, it's an opportunity for energy security, it's an opportunity for jobs, it's an agenda that the agricultural sector can get behind. And in that sense, we think it's something that many policymakers, many stakeholders can be interested in, and something that has a lot of potential for growth in the coming years. Thank you.
Bueno, gracias, Tomás, por darnos esta.
Thank you, Thomas, for giving us this global vision. In this focus that you're having on Latin America, beyond the difficulties that you mentioned that relate to cost issues, is there something about biogas that you would like to highlight on the production, since we have been working at OLADE with actually on liquid fuels and the potential that Brazil has apart from Brazil in biogas production, where you see greater possibilities of development?
So these things are very much tied together, right? When you produce liquid biofuels, you usually have a lot of waste residues, which can then be used to produce biogas. So all of the major biofuel producers have a large potential. Similarly, most of the countries that have a strong agricultural sector, and I think this is most countries in Latin America, right? They have a lot of waste. And this means that there's a potential to use that waste. And when you produce biogas, this means you will have less waste going to landfills, for example, or less crops being burned, because this is still a practice here in the region. Instead of burning all of that dry straws, you can use that to produce biogas. So there's a lot of potential in every country that has a strong agricultural sector. The potential will be even more interesting for those countries that import natural gas, because usually they're going to be paying more for this natural gas, so it's more cost competitive to use or to produce local resources.
Gracias.
Thank you. We are now moving on to get to know local experience that Pablo will tell us about in Costa Rica and what is being done for implementing methane reduction measures via biogas. Good morning. I would like to begin by thanking OLADE for the opportunity to participate in this event, and specifically to the observatory team, which I know they have put in much effort for this to be a success that we are having today. And we'll begin discussing about our national methane strategy, which at this time we are in a process of building it, of construction. However, we have progress on what's being executed to undertake or to apply the strategy as per se. Costa Rica currently is emphasizing much attention to bioenergy in general. So, in that order of ideas, we are making progress with the hydrogen strategy, with the bioenergy strategy per se, which will also include biofuel aspects and biomass, waste management. And among the analyses, we have biomethane, which has its own separate chapter that will later be included as everything. So, moving along, the National Biomethane Strategy, what is being proposed under aid of UNDP and ONUDI, or UNIDO, a biomethane strategy is being worked on, which at this time the consultancy is based on two goals. A first goal that is obtaining a regulatory framework that will give us the strategy as such, and also an infrastructure on what would be the value chain for this strategy. In the second phase, we would have a financial framework which will establish a blended fund which has green and blue impact, and also a line that includes the matter of fair transition of the sector, so that there is not much conflict with regards to generating jobs. And actually, as Thomas was saying, to consider how much jobs are being generated. So basically, at this time, we have 5 pillars being worked on. These 5 pillars would be on production, reconversion, technology reconversion of heavy transport, on social inclusion, on the market, and on governance planning. Prior analysis was made, and it reached the conclusion that the best possible market for biomethane in Costa Rica is on reconversion of transport, because with the people that this process has been carried out with, the other option was conversion, utilization of gas, biomethane in general, for self-consumption in electricity, but not agreement. According to the analyses and surveys made, it was considered that this path was better because there was no real interest from users to do that kind of self-consumption. So for that reason, is that for biomethane specifically, we are preferring to work on heavy transport. So phases are being established that will be included in this process, that we are also aligning with the development of the NDC that we should be presenting this year, most countries, and so we're working with phases. The first phase that will talk about enabling conditions for production and use. A second phase which is consolidating infrastructure so that they, or for those people who have an interest in participating in production, and to begin using it in vehicles and reconverting those vehicles that wish to do so. And a third phase that includes the mainstream use of biomethane for transport. And in this thesis, supported by the strategies of bioenergy in general, it is also important to remind that this process, we also have it among or within the update of our decarbonization plan that is also coming out this year. So our intent is for this process to go in parallel in all public policy instruments that we are developing. Basically, the question is whether, according to the information that we have, is it possible or not to perform creating this market or performing enough methane or biomethane that can be used. So according to the information, currently we have around 47,000 units for the country for heavy freight transport, and the calculation tells that we would be taking up 230 million tons yearly of biomethane produced to reach this. So the analysis we have here, Los Tajos is the metropolitan plant for water treatment in the country. Rastrojo de Piña, you know that Costa Rica's pineapple shavings. So this is the amount generated, as well as cattle droppings have this yearly potential of biomethane. So with this potential, we would have transport that can be supplied with just over double the units that are being proposed, that we would need to supply the whole heavy cargo market. And the effect that we would have on mitigation is close to just over 40% of emissions according to our gases inventory. So the answer is that yes, it is possible for Costa Rica to put to use the biomethane that we can capture or use, and there's a potential for mitigation. The analysis being led at this time, technically, is being made in the north area for pineapple shaving. So in the in north of the country, we have these production areas or hotspots where the inventory of swine droppings and pineapple shavings is enough to carry out pilots. So according to these three areas for the analysis, we have generated a scenario, a possible scenario on how we can generate biomethane. In this scenario, for approximately 56,000 hectares of pineapple crops, we would have around 6.5 million tons yearly. And the other animal-based raw materials, we have identified that they can sustain management of this waste that can propose a production of biomethane that at the end of the day would avoid approximately 15 tons of equivalent CO2 per hectare. So the scenario for reduction you see is quite high related to conventional management of stubble against biomethane production. So we would also be resolving the issue of managing farming waste. So the potential is very interesting here, and if we project this to 2030, we would be managing 50% of this stubble we were discussing. We would have 30 million tons of waste under this kind of management, around 620 cubic meters of biomethane available for this production, 77 million liters, equivalent liters of diesel displaced, which is another shift, and more than 100,000 tons of CO2 equivalent per year displaced, around 800 new direct jobs generated in the area, and around $450 million in mobilization of investment capital. So in sum, the strategy that we are proposing, the information that we have for the strategy, is giving us a very interesting scenario on what we could have as a global process to put to use one product and to use it to mitigate a significant amount of country emissions. So definitely we believe that the potential for us is high. That's basically it. Thank you, Pablo. And I'm asking you this because we were discussing the importance to bring in all actors to the table every time we're working on a matter. In the development of the strategy, apart from the Ministry of Energy, who else is participating? Is it being done globally with agriculture? How is the whole strategy being led to reach these results, to attain these results? The development, as I said, we are in a creation phase. So we already have a proposal for the strategy where our UNDP and UNIDO colleagues have helped us, and along with the ministry. And in that stage, the first thing we are working on are awareness workshops and seeking opportunities for improvement. So at the country level, we are executing many workshops. Already 3 have been executed, if I'm not mistaken. And this is important that they're not only carried out in San Jose, but also in the regions. And this way we guarantee for the information to be made cross-cutting and to get more people's opinion, because anyway, under the strategy, we want it for it to be grounded and applicable. So the example with pineapple stubble allows us to understand that there's potential, and by executing those regional workshops, we're seeking other products. And we're also trying to understand how waste works, where it's very trendy in the country, to see how waste can be put to use. There are options for management of energy and for biomethane. There are other management options according to the physical and geographical realities of the country. But in general, we take the opinion of many people. For instance, we're also talking to the rice people and oil palm specifically to know whether they are included under this process, or in what way are they thinking about cutting back emissions and how much interest they have on the matter from the biomethane perspective. So that's why we are taking our time in this process of consultation at the beginning of January, and we hope that we would have a strategy with official norm. So in sum, we are performing quite a broad dissemination effort. I'm not sure if we have any questions from the audience, something you would like to dive deeper on for Tomás or for Pablo on the strategy of Costa Rica or the state of biomethane. Apologies, we have no audio in the booth.
Gracias. Sí, no sé si podemos...
Thank you, and yes, I'm not sure if we can see the slides again. So under what we are calling here bio-waste, we have wastewaters. So it's a percentage of what's under bio-waste. Certainly it is feedstock that has a significant potential as well. And there are some countries that are already using a little to produce biogas from wastewater. This is something that can be found in Europe, but I also believe there are several experiences here in Latin America. I'll begin and then I'll hand the floor.
Terms are a bit easier for me there. So absolutely, there are many ways to provide incentives. In the past 5 years, we have tracked around 50 policies around the world that are promoting biogas and biomethane production. And these can take different forms. One of the most common ones is to ensure that there's a feed-in tariff. So essentially, if you're producing electricity from this resource, you get a preferential rate for a long period of time, and that ensures that you can recover your investment, your capital expenditure in your operational expenditures. But there are other ways as well. Often there are some countries that will specify a target to say, well, you need to use at least X% of biogases in a certain type of use. And this means then that these resources are going to get a preferential rate because people just need to buy a certain amount of them. I think, and perhaps we might want to hear from Brazil on this, but in the new law on the future fuels, there's some specific mandates there for blending of biogases, and other countries are also thinking in a similar way. In Europe, there's also some requirements related to the share of renewable fuels that each country is using, and this means that to a certain extent, biogases that meet a certain threshold of emissions, they count towards that target. And then this is also another incentive that it's in place and gets them kind of a premium price on the market and helps to make that cost gap and bridge that cost gap. So yes, there are different ways to do this, but absolutely policies are an important part of the equation here.
Sí, bueno.
So first, regarding the previous question, the Los Tajos plant in Costa Rica, it has a marginal biogas production. It is not, we have no biodigesters that capture, but however, with what's being produced, we are generating electricity. So a bit of electricity is captured and the remainder is used for self-consumption. So yes, wastewater in general, there is a possibility to work on it. And for the other question, on the potential we were discussing in Costa Rica of 228 million tons of biomethane yearly for 47,000 vehicles. We're speaking about around 30 plants with a production of 1,080 tons hourly, or no, sorry, metric tons hourly, and approximate investment would be of 50 for this capacity of production. The approximate investment would be of $50 million per plant, according to the information we've generated. And these plants, beyond the transport sector, would generate around 1,700 jobs.
Thank you for the question. It's very relevant. And I think it also brings in another element, which is around international cooperation, right? If there are countries that are willing to shift from natural gas to biomethane and biogases for sustainability reasons, then I think there's a strong case there that they might, especially emerging market and developing economies, they need also international support to make this happen. And I hope that in the different discussions coming forward and including at COP30, maybe this is something that can progress. What we have seen so far in terms of policy experiences around the world is that there's one thing that's very important is that sometimes policymakers, they provide an incentive for installing the plant or the biodigester, for example, and then these are used for a few years, but then they stop being used because there's not enough capital going into the operational expenditure. So people are not able to make the maintenance, and then slowly these biodigesters stop being used just because of cost concerns. So it's very important that policymakers have in mind kind of long-term plans. And similarly, there's often a concern about kind of either one-off or unstable policy frameworks, because for these projects to happen and for them to be sustainable, they need stable frameworks that are operational across multiple years. Otherwise, it just doesn't really happen, or it just happens in a very small way. And I think this is something that we can look at international experience. I understand that there are some policies here in Latin America, but not too many countries have explored this in depth and really deployed this technology. And I think it makes absolute sense, as you were talking about for Colombia, for example, to be thinking about the same sector that is producing the waste, to use this waste to produce biomethane and then transport these fuels and avoid imports of natural gas.
Ahora, sí. Cuenta un poco sobre estas experiencias.
Okay, so we can talk about experiences. Maybe in a moment there's an incentive, but if this is not sustained, if we don't consider cost, if there's no long-term sustainability that is not necessarily up to momentarily programs, this would difficult the permanence of this. And I believe that any rulings dictated into mixing, as it could be the case of biofuels, could be one of the policies that we need to promote coming from the government if they're interested in this subject. And I believe that knowledge is important. Observatory of methane emissions was founded to work with the oil and gas sector mainly, but each time more this topic is relevant. So we thank you for these experiences, and we hope to go deeper on this topic in future editions of debates and other spaces within the Energy Week. Actually, we're thinking about discussing or continuing with the discussion of this topic. So thank you for listening to us. I'm sure that you are hearing that the coffee break is soon. So I'm going to be the host again. I'm going to get out of the moderator role, and let's go back to the coffee break. Thank you.